was about 10 years old when I went to spend summer vacation at my grandma's house. It was an old house, the kind that looked like it came straight out of a horror movie, with dark wooden walls, huge windows, and creaking noises everywhere. The house had been built at the beginning of the last century, and my grandma always told stories about how it was full of secrets and strange things happened there. But she was in love with the house and promised she would never leave. I had always been fascinated by scary things, so when I arrived and saw that big, eerie place, I got excited. But I wasn't the only one. My cousins, Jake and Tommy, were there too, and the first thing we did was decide to explore every corner of the house. Grandma warned us not to mess with the attic. She said it was dangerous, that the stairs were old and could break, but the way she said it only made us more curious. Of course, that just made us want to go up there even more. After a few days, we finally found the attic door. It was at the end of a narrow hallway, hidden behind a heavy curtain that almost completely covered the entrance. The door was old wood, with a rusty lock. Jake was the first to suggest we go up, and of course, I agreed right away. Tommy hesitated a bit, but in the end, curiosity won. We opened the door, and a narrow, steep staircase appeared in front of us. The air up there was heavy, almost like it had been still for decades. There was a strange darkness in the attic, even with the daylight coming through the small, dusty windows. But we were determined to see what was up there. We climbed up carefully, trying not to make any noise, as if we were afraid of waking something that was sleeping up there. When we reached the top, the atmosphere was even creepier than I had imagined. The floor was covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling corners. There were old furniture pieces covered by white sheets, old boxes piled up in a corner, and a strong smell of mold in the air. Exploring the attic felt exciting at first. Jake opened one of the boxes and found old toys, dolls with missing eyes, and a teddy bear with faded fur. But then Tommy found something that completely changed the mood. He pulled out a large mirror from under a pile of sheets. The mirror was cracked, but the weirdest thing was the frame, covered in symbols I had never seen before. When Tommy touched the mirror, a shiver went down my spine. The air seemed to get colder, and the sunlight coming through the windows dimmed, as if the day had suddenly gotten darker. That's when we started hearing the noises. At first, it was like a whisper, soft, almost impossible to hear. But soon, it turned into something else, like someone muttering words in a language I didn't understand. We looked at each other, scared. Jake tried to say it was just the wind, but we knew it wasn't. The mirror started fogging up, like someone was breathing on the other side. And then, a hand appeared on the glass, pale and thin, as if it wanted to come out. We backed away, fear taking over. I don't know what happened next. I just remember the feeling of terror overwhelming me. Tommy dropped the mirror, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces on the floor. The sound was loud, echoing through the attic, but the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it got louder, as if something had been released, woken up. Without thinking twice, we ran. We ran for our lives, tumbling down the attic stairs as fast as we could, almost tripping over each other. We pushed each other, desperate to get out. When we got downstairs, we slammed the attic door shut and leaned against it, trying to catch our breath. The whispering was still there, but now it seemed farther away, like it was retreating back to where it came from. Grandma showed up out of nowhere, looking at us with a serious expression. "I told you not to mess with the attic," she said, in a voice I had never heard before. It was like she knew exactly what we had done. That night, none of us could sleep. I kept thinking about that hand in the mirror, the feeling of being watched. The whispering didn't stop, even when I covered my ears. I was losing my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It felt like something had been awakened in that attic, and now it wouldn't leave us alone. Had we unleashed something dark? Were we cursed now? Jake started saying he saw shadows at the bedroom window, and Tommy swore he heard footsteps in the hallway. We knew it wasn't just our imagination. Something had followed us out of the attic, something that was now attached to us. My grandma never mentioned the attic again, but she started watching us closely, as if waiting for something worse to happen. And deep down, we were waiting too. The last days of the vacation were the worst. The feeling of being watched never went away, and the whispers continued, even in broad daylight. My grandma's house had a huge backyard with flowers and fields. It was beautiful, but none of it made us feel better. Just thinking about being watched was terrifying. I started realizing that my grandma's house had more secrets than she let on. One night, I finally gathered the courage to ask her about the attic. She looked at me for a long time before answering. "There are things that should be forgotten," she finally said. "That house has seen a lot of bad things, and some of them are still there, waiting." I never knew exactly what happened in that attic, and maybe it's better that way. What I do know is that after that summer vacation, I never went back to my grandma's house, and I was never the same. After all, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. It was a regular night. One of those you don't really think much about, you know? I was home alone, focused on studying for finals. My mom used to work late back then, so I was already used to being by myself until she got back. The silence was almost comforting, just the sound of the fan spinning and the faint rustle of my book pages. Being home alone was perfect for studying. In complete silence, I could really focus. I never had a problem with being home alone. Until that night. I was in my room, on the second floor, surrounded by books and notes. I had a cup of coffee next to me, already lukewarm, and a playlist of calm songs playing in the background. Everything was peaceful, until I heard a noise from downstairs. It sounded like footsteps, something light, like someone walking in the living room. I thought maybe my mom had come home early. It was strange for her to be back so soon. "Hey, Mom, are you home?" I shouted, a bit distracted, while I kept reading. No answer. Weird, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was on the phone or something. I went back to studying, trying not to overthink it. Then I heard it again. This time, clearer. Slow, cautious footsteps echoing across the wooden floor downstairs. That sent a chill down my spine, because it was late and the front door hadn't made its usual noise when it opened. My mom always makes a noticeable sound when she gets home, but that didn't happen this time. I turned the music down and listened. The silence felt thicker now, heavier, like the air had suddenly become dense. My heart started beating faster. I called for my mom again, but only the echo of my own voice answered. I grabbed my phone and decided to call her. Maybe she was somewhere in the house and didn't hear me. The call took a moment to connect, but when she picked up, the relief I felt quickly turned into a bad feeling. "Hey, honey. Everything okay?" Her voice sounded normal, as always, but the problem was what she said next. "I'm still at work." "Why?" My heart skipped a beat. I explained about the sounds, but I tried to keep my voice calm so she wouldn't worry. She suggested it might just be the house settling, or the wind, but something told me it wasn't that. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. The house was too quiet for it to be just the wind. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. I wasn't the scared type, but that night, the idea of going downstairs made me uneasy. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight I kept on my nightstand, something I always had for emergencies, but never really needed to use. I walked down the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight, which only made things worse. When I reached the first floor, I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. Everything looked in place. Furniture, doors closed, nothing out of the ordinary. But the silence was almost suffocating. As I was searching the first floor, a new sound echoed through the house, coming from a direction I didn't expect. It was muffled, like something being dragged, and it seemed to come from the basement. The basement had always been the creepiest part of the house. My mom kept a lot of stuff down there, but I rarely went down. There was always something unsettling about that place, a feeling I could never really explain. The sound happened again, louder this time, like someone or something was moving things down there. My gut told me not to go, to just leave it alone and wait for my mom to get back. But curiosity, mixed with fear, led me to the basement door. I opened it slowly, and the smell of mold and dust hit me, bringing with it a darkness that the flashlight barely cut through. The staircase leading down was narrow and steep, and each step felt like a challenge. When I finally reached the bottom, the air was cold, and the feeling that something wasn't right only grew stronger. The basement was messier than I remembered. Boxes were stacked randomly, old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs, and a dead silence hung in the air. But in the far corner, something caught my eye. There was a door, small and old, that I had never noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and the sound I'd heard seemed to be coming from behind it. I stood there, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it echoed through the walls of the basement. But against my better judgment, I took a step forward, then another, until I was right in front of the door. I pushed it open slowly, expecting to see something normal, a simple explanation for all of this. But what I saw was the opposite. The room beyond was different. Strange symbols were scrawled on the walls, drawn unevenly, and in the center of the room, a figure stood still, with its back to me. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was there, like it had been waiting for me. It was tall and slender, wrapped in shadows, but I could feel it was aware of my presence. I tried to move back, but something held me in place, like my feet were glued to the floor. Then, the figure started to turn, slowly, and a wave of panic washed over me. I knew, deep down, that I shouldn't be there, that I had disturbed something that should have been left alone. When I finally saw the figure's face, or what resembled a face, my blood ran cold. It was like a twisted reflection, something vaguely human, but far from it. The eyes were hollow, lifeless, and the mouth was twisted into a macabre smile. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just stood there, horrified, as the figure took a step toward me. It was like something snapped inside me. In a rush, I managed to break free from whatever had frozen me, and I ran, as fast as I could, back toward the stairs. The sound of my own footsteps echoed in the basement, but there was another sound behind me, something getting closer. I raced up the stairs two at a time, fear driving me, and slammed the basement door shut when I reached the top. I locked it and stepped back, still hearing something banging on the door from below. The night felt endless, and I sat there, on the kitchen floor, with the flashlight shaking in my hands, trying to calm down. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew it was real, that something had been awakened in that house. When my mom finally got home, I was a wreck. She found me shaking, unable to explain what had happened. I tried to tell her, but all I could do was babble about the basement, the figure, the terror I still felt. She hugged me, trying to calm me down, but I knew she didn't understand. The next day, we called a priest to bless the house. He said a long prayer, sprinkled holy water in every corner, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. That place was marked, and I knew things would never be the same. After that day, we avoided the basement. My mom even considered moving out, but we never could. Something kept us there, tied to that house. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was in the basement, it was still there, lurking, waiting in the darkness. When I moved into the new house, I was full of expectations. It was a spacious place with a big garden surrounded by tall trees. The kind of house I'd always wanted. I was excited about the change, imagining all the possibilities for this new beginning. At first, everything seemed perfect. The freshly painted walls, the shiny wooden floors, and the peaceful silence of the residential neighborhood. But within the first few days, I started to feel something different, something I couldn't quite explain. It was a strange feeling, like the house was always watching. At first, I ignored it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, big changes like this always bring some nervousness. But as the days went by, that feeling grew stronger. It was like every time I walked through the rooms, I was invading someone else's space. An invisible presence clearly irritated with me being there. The energy in the house started to shift. A heaviness, a kind of oppression, settled into every corner. I tried to focus on getting used to the new place, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me alone. During the day, the house seemed normal, But at night, things changed. The air became thicker, heavier, as if something or someone was moving through the shadows, watching my every move. It was during the first week that I noticed something even more disturbing. Every time I got near the basement, the air would turn icy, and an invisible pressure seemed to push against me. It was as if the basement was hiding something that didn't want to be found, a presence that grew stronger the closer I got. One night, while I was watching TV in the living room, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It was a low sound, but clear, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart started racing, but I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe a rat, or something falling on its own, which was common in old houses. I stood up and walked slowly to the basement door, each step followed by the feeling that something was watching me. When I reached the door, I put my hand on the doorknob and hesitated. The air around me was cold, almost freezing. I opened the door slowly and turned on the light, which flickered before finally stabilizing. I went down the stairs, each one creaking under my weight. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from the lamp, making the shadows grow on the walls. When I reached the bottom, the sound stopped, leaving a disturbing silence. I searched the basement, but found nothing out of place. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. I went back upstairs with a strange sense that something had changed in the house, as if I had woken something that should have been left alone. The following days were torment. The feeling that something was with me, lurking in the dark corners of the house, grew stronger. I started hearing footsteps at night, always coming from the basement. I began locking my bedroom door at night, even though I lived alone. The footsteps were slow, methodical, like someone was pacing back and forth, angry at my presence. I tried to ignore it, to focus on work, but the tension in the house was unbearable. One afternoon, I decided to face whatever was down there. I grabbed a flashlight and went down to the basement again, determined to find an explanation. But what I found was even more disturbing. On the floor, strange marks, deep scratches that hadn't been there before, forming a pattern I couldn't understand. The air was so heavy it was hard to breathe, and a freezing cold came from the walls. The next night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a different sound, something I hadn't heard before. It was deep, irregular breathing, coming directly from the basement. My heart stopped for a second, and a cold fear ran down my spine. I got up, my heart racing, and grabbed the flashlight. Every part of me was screaming not to go down there, to let it go, but something pushed me to do it. Besides, I was tired of this situation. Whatever it was, I was going to face it because this was my house. I was determined to confront it, even though I was scared. I opened the basement door and went down. The stairs seemed endless. When I reached the bottom, the breathing stopped, but the air was thick with a presence, something that was there, hidden in the shadows. The flashlight beam hit the far wall, and I saw something that froze my blood. In the corner, a vague figure, a shadow that shouldn't be there, slowly rose. It wasn't human, but it wasn't a normal ghost either. It seemed to be made of pure darkness, a manifestation of pure hatred. I was paralyzed, unable to move, as it came closer, step by step. In a panic, I broke free of the fear that held me and ran up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut and leaned against it, my heart pounding wildly. The house now felt alive, each wall pulsing with an evil energy I couldn't understand. The sound of footsteps and scratching came from all sides, and I knew I wasn't safe there. That night, I fled to a hotel, leaving all my things behind. I don't know what that was, but I wasn't going to find out. I never went back to that house, and I sold it as soon as I could. But even today, I still feel like something from that place follows me, a shadow hiding in the darkest corners of my mind, waiting for the right moment to return.